is Leo Farberg, and we're going to talk about a few things in a couple of minutes. We weren't here last week. I wasn't supposed to be here last week, but Leo was. The network went a little bit strange on us, so we don't quite know what happened, but so we missed last week. So we're here again today, and we're going to talk about some of the things that came up for us through questions, through our own ideas, and so on last week. Anyway, enough waffle. Let's get on with it. So what we're going to look at today is loosely levels of psychological trauma, because it can help. If you understand some things about levels of psychological trauma, it can help. We're not talking about self-diagnosis here. We just had a bit of a chat about that offline. But there are some things that can work out really well. How do I know that I'm traumatized? Is an interesting question. So how do I know that I'm traumatized? Talking about interesting questions, if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to drop them into the chat. Put them in through Facebook or wherever you happen to be listening or watching right now, and Steve will feed them across to us, and we will respond. If we can't respond because it's too lengthy or too weighty a question, what we'll do, we'll take the question and we'll respond to it next week, next Thursday, 1 o'clock UK. We're a little bit late today, but such is life. This stuff happens. Anyway, Leo, how are you doing?
Good. Hope we'll have a good time.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear. Can you hear me?
You're doing good. Yes, yeah, I can. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm a little bit nervous about technology right now. Strange things keep happening.
Oh, me too.
Anyway,
I'm such a I'm so bad at technology. It seems like the sound
it's not that
delayed.
you're bad at technology, it's that technology never behaves itself. That's the problem. All right, okay, so I need to slow down a little bit. I'll do that for you, no problem. So let's start with something that might seem a little bit obvious. Remember, we're talking about psychological trauma. So if I have a clear memory or a recollection of an event that was psychologically disturbing for me, that could suggest that I suffered at some point in the past a trauma, a psychological trauma. So I'm going to use me as an example because something did happen to me some years ago. And I think it's quite important to share because it will highlight some of the issues. So I was skating along on my rollerblades one evening. It was a beautiful evening, and crossing a bridge, I didn't see a dent in the ground, fell backwards, kicked my left knee with my right skate, said some rude words, and ended up at the hospital where I was diagnosed with a fracture to the top of the tibia, and heel to hip plaster was put on. So it meant I couldn't go to work for 6 weeks. And I kind of celebrated that. That was cool. That was good news. Why was it good news? Because we had a very young family. And that meant I got to stay at home for 6 weeks with my very young family. And wasn't the world wonderful? Yes, it was. Thank you very much. So after 6 weeks, I went for x-rays and the doctor said, "You've done really well. The fracture is pretty much gone." And he showed me an x-ray image, and true enough, compared to the originals, there was very little there, a little bit of cloud. So all was good. And he said, what you need to do next is go to physiotherapy, build up the strength again, and you'll be back to normal, whatever normal was. So I wondered, did I suffer some sort of trauma? Psychological trauma, not physical, but psychological trauma. And why did I wonder that? And it was simply because the fracture was getting better, but the pain wasn't. In fact, the pain had started to spread arms, fingers, wrists, all kinds of crazy places around my body that had not been involved in the accident. So, what on earth was going on? Eventually, I was passed over to a psychologist, which was a bit of a strange situation because when two psychologists meet and one's a patient, I found that very, very uncomfortable. As nice as the psychologist was, but I didn't like the feel of it. So I was kind of in denial that there could be anything wrong. But one thing that we uncovered, and I really should have known about this, was that in my past, I'd had a very bad relationship. It was a little bit abusive. I didn't have friends because I was kept away from interacting with other people, and all kinds of things were happening. But what did I do? I buried my head well and truly into the sand, also known as work. I worked hard, disappeared into my work, and ignored everything that was going on around me. Eventually, that relationship ended, and I found myself with my new partner and our children. This is over a period of time. This wasn't in 5 minutes as the story is running. So I thought that new relationship and children, everything was well, but apparently not. Because I started to feel strange things. I started to feel a little bit depressed and a little bit angry and a little bit frustrated. And I started to worry a lot. I worry about when could I go back to work? And then a doctor told me, Steve, you're in a wheelchair. You're not getting out of that wheelchair ever again. And that was a kind of a big hit as well. So there's all this stuff going on. And it was almost like an onion. If anybody's aware of the story, James and the Giant Peach, this was Steve and the Giant Onion. And with the psychologist, every time we peeled off a layer of what was going on in my life psychologically, there was something else hiding underneath it. And then we'd peel off that layer and deal with it. And underneath that, there was another layer. And it seemed as though these layers were never ending. And I was in a dark place. So what's all that about, Leo? What is it? What was going on?
Trauma is actually not that something happens to you. It's not a memory of a story or big event that shook you off and gave you hard times. The trauma is what's left when your nervous system is kind of hooked to this state that you endured while having this event or a series of event, because it may produce kind of different effect when you have a one-time big event that was too much for your nervous system and it went to a shutdown mode to protect you or whether it was kind of a way you lived, like if it was a repetitive abuse or neglect or whatever emotional well emotional load you've been having while being raised, especially because children are more prone, but it doesn't mean that adults cannot get trauma. But we usually speak about childhood trauma because it's the formative years, the state of the brain is has a special traits to it. The child's brain is much different from what and child's consciousness, how they process information. We process information when we are children. It's kind of different. That's why most trauma goes back to childhood, and and of course nobody likes to feel bad, and our psyche has lots of intricate ways to protect itself. You've probably heard of Freudian defense mechanisms. Most of it is true, that all kinds of stuff, to be busy, to be good at school, to be like to not to notice, to or it's not I know, but I look like I don't, that nothing's happened. It just really forgetting things, suppressing things, uh, and when a new trauma happens, like even if it's a physical trauma, because nervous system doesn't really differentiate between a, a psychological thing and physical thing, because whatever happens which is
Yeah.
scary to the body, to the brain, the reaction would be the same. So a minor event like it wasn't minor trauma, it was a fracture anyway, and kind of acute pain in the moment might be a trigger to offload the whole stuff that was kept for so
Yeah.
many years.
Hmm. I think one of the things that came to mind when I was reviewing this, my story, yesterday, I was doing this yesterday. So I was doing a great job of acting like I was okay. This is before I broke my leg. Okay, so I was doing a really cool job of acting like I was okay. And a thought that came into my mind yesterday was, please don't interrupt my performance. Because if you interrupt my performance, I might break or forget that I'm trying to bury something yet. That feeling of acting out to protect myself, in my case, that's what I was doing. And I think that's something worth thinking about. How often do we act a part, play a part?
No one
To,
wants us to be vulnerable or open about our wounds. I have the
yeah,
same experience with my own trauma. You get up and you act as if nothing has happened, and you go out and do your thing, like work or study or whatever, relationships,
yeah,
parties.
yeah,
We,
yeah, brilliant. Yeah, that's what we all do, and that is why, for example, Leo and I will often say, don't suffer in silence. Don't pretend it's not there. You know what's going on. You know that something isn't right. So talk about it. There's no
I think
stigma involved.
sometimes I think sometimes if people don't even want to turn to the idea that they do suffer, they will keep up like and keep stiff upper lip and say nothing is wrong, everything's fine, even if I know that I've been hurt, but everybody else is hurt, or even suffer. Many people suffer more than I do, so I don't suffer. It is not considered suffering, but other things happen like physical pain or chronic illness, or some patterns in relationships or reactions which are not no good, but still well, sorry. Sorry I said that, and then stop. The same thing repeat and repeat all the time.
Yeah. What about this? So I did a pretty good job of burying everything that had been going on in my past. And we're talking about a period of about 17 years. Okay, so I did a pretty good job of keeping it under wraps. Stiff upper lip, you just mentioned that, all that stuff. Is it not perhaps better so those things remained buried?
We have a question there.
Yeah, I saw, I've just seen it. Hello, I was raped by stepfather. I have trauma. Um, shall we respond to that now, or
What do you think?
how do you? I think we should.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
probably that's something I should respond to, because my trauma is also chronic sexual abuse from my elder cousin. uh, which lasted like from about 9 or 10 years old. I don't remember exactly, up to almost 17. Um, that's the trauma I've been referring to, and I basically and as a psychotherapist, I do meet a lot of people uh, who had this kind of trauma, and it is. I mean, the worst thing about it is that it's not just a terrible thing that happens with a child, which should not have happened, but it's also the mm, an inability to talk about it, to share, because you think that you are bad. You're not, you're doing things that you're not supposed to do, and you and the guilt and the shame which are involved into this whole situation, they become too much. And probably, well, the body might forget things. I mean, the act itself, but this overload of guilt and shame, and the necessity to keep silent about it, and not having support, and the child cannot process things that are happening on the adult at the level as adult can. And when you grow up with this, lots of things are buried inside. And I'm sure that therapy and support is necessary anyway. If you had this kind of experience, you do have to find someone you can trust, at least trust enough to come and start talking about it. Because I also had therapists that were overwhelmed by my story and couldn't deal with it. I tried starting my therapy at the time when therapists in my place and where I lived were not prepared well. They're still not prepared well. And so they thought that even like talking about it is enough, and it wasn't just talking about it. I left the room devastated because I felt the shutdown. My first therapist, uh, well, she didn't say anything special, but I felt like a wall standing between us, and it kind of brought more harm, a lot of harm to me. So now I'm speaking freely about it because I did a lot of work to process it. uh, and
Yeah.
that's why I'm kind of trying to be open and trying to support the idea that you do have to uh, find somebody, at least to talk about it for a start. And then it's not necessarily to talk much about it in therapy, but uh, to reshape or unload this uh, bulk of guilt and shame,
Yeah.
because they are the part of it, a great part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed a comment came on the screen a moment ago that said, "I don't want to talk, it's a guilt." So this
So
person
probably
might,
guilt is something to start with,
yeah,
not
absolutely.
the
That's what I
event
was,
itself. Okay, I have guilt. Let's talk about guilt, how it feels
yeah,
and what it affects,
yeah,
because guilt is kind of paralyzing. It's kind of shutting you down.
yeah,
uh, it's like you turned in almost into a stone, but the necessary part of life is being alive. So
yeah,
probably the greatest thing here is to start melting this ice and trying to kind of shake the stone.
yeah.
And I'm
I think
sorry I'm
a good,
smiling, but I did
no,
but
no,
I
it's,
got through.
yeah,
It's just the smile because I do believe a person, because I know you can get through it, but it's so hard in the beginning. It's so terrifying.
absolutely. I think just to go back to my own example, so all the relationship stuff that hurt me, to think about it before I started getting help, to think about it was so incredibly stressful. So what did I do to it? I put it all in a tin, screwed on the lid as tight as I could possibly get it, and buried it. Great way of dealing with it? Not at all. It seemed like a good idea at the time. So in a sense, all the past was a kind of buried stress, buried trauma, buried emotions, all kinds of things. So in my present moment, I spent all my time ignoring the past, but worrying about the future. Is this stuff going to happen again? What am I going to do about it? How am I going to deal with it? So I've got one head in the future, worrying about what I'm going to do, and part of my head's still in the past, keeping this stuff under control. So in present moment, I'm not really doing anything positive, anything helpful. And that definitely came out in my attitude to people around me. I was mean, but I'm not a mean person. That's one of the things I remember quite clearly. I used to get angry. I'm not an angry person. I don't do anger. That's not in my makeup, as it were. I'm lucky, I guess, but I don't really do anger. And I noticed that before all of this came out, I was a very proactive person. That was me, Mr. Proactive, and I loved it. That it was cool. It made me feel good, and it was part of me. It was my passion, if you will. And I noticed that my proactive self had gone somewhere else. Don't know where it was, but it was definitely not present. And I became narrow-minded. I was never narrow-minded, but my glass was always half empty. So those simple things that I've just described, they are quite simple to describe, were having a profound effect. And there's another reason why it's good to talk about some of the things. And we started talking about unlocking the can because I used the can analogy with the psychologist I saw. And we talked about opening the can and taking things out carefully, which is what we did over a period of time. So that helped. So what else can we do, Leo?
There was a question. There was a question on screen. I didn't grasp it, the whole thing. But will my trauma go away? Like if I deal with guilt? Well, trauma is not something that easily goes away, but it can be healed. And there is a trick here when you start thinking about trying to get rid of trauma, or yeah, if would trauma go away if I get help? That's the question. It'll take time. You can when you deal with trauma, you still, how to put it, you will the onion analogy that Steve used is a good one, because trauma, especially the early one, not the like fresh event that happened kind of sometime very like a couple of days ago, but if you carry that weight, carry that experience with you, it's like formative. You act from the place of a traumatized person, and many things that you do, if not all, are kind of formed or shaped by trauma, by your traumatic self. I mean, this role that you get when you're traumatized, this way you do things. And when you start dealing with trauma in therapy or in and I do believe that therapy is the first way, and there are many things that you can do, like getting support, entering support groups, or making many different things in the community, because trauma is always affecting relationships, the way you talk to people, the way you show or not show yourself and your talents. So every time you come to trauma, you kind of peel a layer or part of a layer, and because somewhere in the middle of this onion there's a green sprout, and you want to try to find that green sprout that um, that is kind of making you alive. But the trick is that you never get to the person you would have been if this stuff had happened. You know, you you are what you are, but at the same time making yourself alive and going and showing and being proud of who you are, whatever you dealt with. But it's not a simple and then one time issue. It's just a step by step, sometimes couple of steps back, and then again, and then try some other way and add something. It's like a big renovation, but still with the same basis that you are what you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my can analogy is quite useful, because sitting in that
Yes.
present moment, I wasn't doing anything because I was too bothered about worrying about the past and what was happening in the future, and nothing was happening, and the past and the future were just getting worse until we took a breath. You know, like, hey, take a breath, think about it.
Yeah, and being angry and being narrow-minded are like characteristics of traumatic state.
Yeah,
because the trauma does affect your nervous system. It does affect your brain, and especially the memory, the place where memory is stored and processed. It's the particular thing, because what's trauma? Trauma is just, okay, it hurts. You should remember that that you don't deal with these things anymore. It gets scared every time you pass by it, and you have to remember, just don't touch the hot like stones in the fire. And our psyche takes the events that hurt us before as like hot stones in the fire. Don't touch that, get away from it. You have to remember. That's why memory issues are very much affected by trauma.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is a question.
I think it's more of a statement from Lucy. I think it's a great statement.
Yeah.
Because I know for sure that accepting that I could show my vulnerability was a big step. That was huge. I didn't want to appear vulnerable. For goodness sake, I had a good job. I was well respected, etc., 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 and I couldn't be seen as weak in any way. And I'm laughing about it right now, but it's not funny, not really. You know,
Yeah,
so
I can resonate with this, and that's why I'm like, yeah, right. I know what it looks like.
Yeah, so, and absolutely with Lucy, that's perfect.
Yes.
You know, showing your vulnerability without fear of reprisal or punishment. For me, there was always a reprisal if I said anything. If I said I felt weak or vulnerable, if I said that I'd lost friends and I wasn't happy about it, it would have become my fault. You know, so it was huge to get over that hurdle. It took some time as well. As Leo said, it doesn't happen in 5 minutes, unfortunately. There's no fast track, no quick fix, but there are tracks, there are fixes that we can work on, and that is important that people understand that. So, Leo, what would you like to go somewhere else now? I've got plenty of places we can go.
Go on, show your plan. I'll join your plan. I know that you have a lot of notes. My notes are a mess.
My notes are always a mess. Come on. What about different levels of trauma? So let's have a think. So we've talked about what is psychological trauma, but certainly some professionals tend to put trauma under certain headers like chronic trauma, acute trauma, or there's a more complicated version of all three. Sorry, of those two. So there's a tricky version, a version that is a mixture of chronic and acute, and that really can be a kind of worm. So is it useful to know that there are different levels? What do you think, Leo?
I think it's just an idea, and it's not that well, there are no like very definite distinctions, because everybody is hurt, everybody has. Some people think. I mean, the specialists think that everybody has some amount of trauma in their lives. And it's not that your mommy did not allow you to have a cookie before dinner, It's not a trauma. Like many parents now say, if I don't buy the child this thing and they cry, will it traumatize? No, it won't. But if it's regular, and if it's with some, mentioning that you are not good enough to buy you these things, and that you've been a bad child, and whatever, that's more traumatizing than not buying things or letting have a cookie. And we kind of define, well, there are three basic traumatizing factors. One is what most people understand, is that a big event, something happened, like a rape or a disaster or a car accident, or maybe something milder like a divorce. Because what we have to mention is the ACEs, the study on the traumatic events in childhood. But what is more difficult in therapy is what we call complex PTSD. PTSD is the state that we get after trauma. Again, it's not something that happened to you, it's how your nervous system reacted, and whether it sticks to the state. That is PTSD. That makes you react in special ways, and feel the body feels in special ways. And complex PTSD is something you get when you are repeatedly traumatized throughout your childhood. It's family events, it's abuse of all kinds, it's punishment, it's rejection, it might be bullying at school, and a lot of things. It's being in a war zone, it's being living in poverty, living in a scary and scary neighborhood, because it's the way you live, and you live in constantly in a scared or aggressive mood state, in the defense state. And that it's a difficult thing in therapy to deal with. I mean, and for a person as well, because it is the way I am. How can I change the way I am? Because I grew up with this. And the third thing is not getting enough, not getting something in the necessary time, like when a child isn't picked up or fed by schedule but not by the need. It might also then be traced to as the start of traumatic childhood. And
Yeah.
it not doesn't mean the parents are mean. It means they do believe something, and they think they do the right thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's we're not here to blame people around us,
Yeah.
but we're here
Absolutely.
to just to know that yes, some things can be traumatic for us, and uh, and again, it's not correct to speak about the level of trauma. What I like to know from a person I'm working with is how you feel, and how much of the rest of your life is affected, but by what you feel and what you react, what your patterns are, uh, and how it prevents you from getting what you could, you know, or how
Yeah.
it spoils things for you.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to see. There's been a couple of comments flashing up on the screen during the last few minutes. Gary talks about after 4 years, still in a state of constant hypervigilance. And then there was somebody else, and I'm sorry to that somebody else because I missed the name. And that person said, Becky it was, thank you. She had to be the strong one. So by being the strong one, I guess what happens there, I had to be the strong one at work, I thought. And by being the strong one, I wasn't managing my own challenges. And because I didn't manage my own challenges, perhaps it became worse. And just a thought, and we've mentioned this before, this mind-body connection. There really is a mind-body connection. I had all this stuff going on in my head, and what happened to me, I ended up with a chronic pain condition. I couldn't walk. There was nothing wrong with my body. I had so many scans, it was ridiculous. I must have cost a fortune. Scans, medications, pain medication, for all these things that were going on in my body, and they were real. The pain was very real. But when we started to unwrap that onion, take away those layers and manage those layers, the pain started to get less and less. And today I'm riding my mountain bike again. Good news. Sorry, that was my water bottle just went flying off the table.
Yeah, because you're getting emotional about things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there is a very true and real mind-body connection. I feel my emotions more intensely because I think I have what I like to call emotional flashbacks. I feel emotions in the present that I couldn't or didn't want to or know how to feel in the past when I'm triggered. That was from Karen. Thanks for that, Karen. That's an interesting. Wow, we could spend some time unpacking that
Yeah.
one. We've got 10 minutes. We're going to manage this in 10 minutes.
Well, probably we can't just manage it, but we can dwell on it for a little while, because it's an important thing.
Yeah.
Can you?
Okay. Go, Leo. You start.
Okay. This is what you are describing. This is trauma. It's like feeling the same way as it was necessary or was at the time of the event. But we talked about triggers the previous time, and again, Gary mentioned his constant state of hypervigilance. It's yes, being ready for threat. And what I would like to mention is not just, it's characteristic of trauma. That's, you are describing traumatic, what we call symptoms. They are. But I think it would be useful to know how to deal with it. It's not that I tell you and it turns off. No. But what you have to understand, that it's basically in a nervous system state. It's not some because people are still kind of dividing psychology and body. But psychology is something that the psyche is something that is, well, there are different theories, but it's kind of stuck in the body. It lives in the body. Psyche lives in the nervous system. And
Yeah.
trauma is a nervous system state. So there are the well-known types of therapy are mostly talk therapy or psychoanalysis, and they are good, but the truth is they're not good or not enough for trauma. It's not at all enough to talk about it. Sometimes talking about it is what we call re-traumatizes you, because we just remember things and talk about the details or whatever could have been done or couldn't have been done. But talking is, I use talking. I talk a lot, and my clients talk a lot, but it's mostly to draw a plan. Okay, this is this and this is that. How do we try to get there? And a lot of things I have to explain, because what the best way to work with trauma, both come from the top, discussing things and imagining things or reimagining things. There are technologies in psychotherapy that allow us to go kind of deeper into the body, but sometimes it's not enough to get up or down to the body nervous system, which is the part of the nervous system that in the body. So there are bottom-up approaches that here are working as well. It's working with the body and the body sensations. And here come things like mindful breathing and working with the body sensation, trying to transform them, and repeating new programs. Because what trauma is, it's a program, and a very primitive and tough and hard to beat. But programs are manageable for programming. You try new things, and you kind of and also Steve and I are big fans of positive psychology. It's not just taking the bad stuff away, which I think is important, but also is paying attention to good stuff, and not just being like spiritual or positive bypassing things, but it's like growing your capacity to be susceptible to good stuff. And it's also it retrains your nervous system. It's not just talking about sunshine and butterflies, but it's like sensing the good stuff, teaching yourself to sense the good stuff. And if you combine both, like go in circles, or like like an elevator. Okay, now we're going down, now we're going up, now we're going to look out of the window to see the good stuff, now we're going to the basement to get out the bad stuff. And these types of therapy and combining different methods may bring more good than just sticking to one, like talking therapy type.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, you know that I'm with you 100% in there, Leon. This is what I do as well. So I was just thinking about, so I practice mindfulness, and I use mindfulness with my clients as much as I possibly can. In other words, if it's appropriate, I use it. I teach them to work through various challenges using mindfulness. But if I go back to a little while after my knee was fractured, maybe 3 months afterwards, I'm not sure exactly, I met a physiotherapist called John, who was a Dutch guy, and he taught me how to breathe through the pain. I remember looking at this guy thinking, well, we've got an interesting one here.
Yeah.
What is it all about? How can I breathe through the pain? I breathe in and out through my nose, my mouth, not through the pain in my leg or my hand, wherever it happened to be. But he taught me that by breathing through the pain, I was recognizing where the pain was. I was helping my body to relax. And whilst all that was going on, my mind became clearer. And I could kind of get hold of some of the challenges that were up there. And it was incredible. Just such a small thing. That was a single thing that fixed me. That was in one of a number of things. But I think it's important to know that there are other ways, there are other methods. Positive psychology. My first question with most of my clients is, tell me your superpowers. What are you really good at? So that's the starting point. We're not starting from a point of weakness. And I think that's important. I noticed that Sheila mentioned moving from a functioning adult to a fearful child. And the triggers that can send you back to become a fearful child as an adult are powerful. We've got to learn how to recognize those triggers and deal with them. So, Leo, did you read anything else? Because whilst I was having a little rant there, I was missing those messages.
I read some, but we have like 3 or 4 minutes left. I'm sorry. It's a pity that we are getting questions by the end of our time. But I just picked a couple of words out of what's written, but in the mentioning of triggers, and we're usually speaking of triggers. And again, along with the word triggers and in the vocabulary, you do have to also bring the word kind of glimmers or good stuff or whatever the word is, that you have to train your glimmers, like one of our gurus of psychotherapy and trauma field says. It's because when you, at least at first, you have to have some glimmers that may later grow into some sunshine or light or whatever, because at first, one of the ways is to kind of balance both good and bad. Because when we're stuck in like bad or dark stuff or triggers or reactions, it's hard, but you like make like hooks and trying to stick to some better place at least one time in a row, like sometimes. And the other question was, where the notice about turning into a child, like a little, like from a functional adult to a scared child. It's also there are so many things you can do about it, because what's the central part of it is that there is a central part of you, even if you don't feel it. Sometimes you feel disconnected from yourself, but I'm sure that everybody has a strong personality inside, even if you don't feel like it, or you're not connected to it, but just believe that there is a part of you that is always there, and this is the boss within your realm. You are your own realm. So sometimes it takes a lot of time in the therapy to find the boss and to wake them up and say, okay, you are the boss. I usually remind my clients about the movie or the book, The Return of the King, the third part of the Tolkien's trilogy, where Aragorn in the movie, he didn't want to accept his king's position and become a king because he thought he's weak and vulnerable, and he's the same as his ancestors, but finally through the movie he takes his position and his authority and his responsibility. So sometimes say, okay, it's a quest, but not for Mordor, but for returning the king or the queen to the throne. So Steve and I might become good Gandalfs for that. to find the king, to wake
That's really
up,
cool. I love that one.
Bring it to the throne. You need
I'd never
you
seen
need
myself
a
as
wizard
wizard
for a good
Yeah,
journey.
it makes sense. Nice one, Leo. I love it. It would be helpful, Steve Beer, if you can hear us, I'm sure you can, if you could drop all these comments to me on Facebook Messenger, and Leo and I can use them next week to respond in a little bit more detail, because I'm acutely aware that we've had to kind of skim over a few things and we've not answered all of them entirely, and I really would like us to be able to do that. Leo, any final words?
Well, and again, it's a pity we're running out of time, but we're here every Thursday. What's that? It's 1 p.m. UK time.
Yeah.
Because I live
That's
kind of
fine.
in a different time zone. Sometimes it's hard for me to count. And we're here and we're ready to answer questions and bring up some things, what our experience, because we were kind of open today and mentioned both our personal experience in traumatic events and the way we dealt with it, not just as therapists. It's later you become a therapist. You have your trauma, then you become a therapist, then you heal your own trauma. Or maybe some other,
Yeah, that would have been nice.
Yeah, and we're here to help. We'll be glad to help you at least find your glimmer, your way, your maybe direction where to go.
Yeah. I do like the term glimmer, but my current favorites, and this comes from positive psychology researcher, is micro moments of positivity. We've got to be careful because we can also have micro moments of negativity as well. But if you think about it, if you fall in love with somebody, you fall in love based on a few factors at the time. And it could be looks, it could be their personality, it could be a lot of things. So you fall in love based on all these things, but you don't stay in love based on those things. You stay in love based on micro moments of positivity. So little micro moments that are shared, little nice things that are shared, little facts of life that are shared, and we build all these up, and we've got love, and we keep hold of love. I'm just using love as a loose example, but micro moments is kind of like glimmers. It's very similar, so we need these micro moments of positivity to manage our trauma, and we can supply those micro moments. Well, we can't supply them, but we can help you discover those micro moments of positivity through group work, working in groups. You can find out more at the Facebook page that we've been flashing. It's on the screen right now. We work in groups. Sometimes we work with individuals. It varies. It depends on lots of things. But a conversation is free. So contact us, have a chat. Let's see what we can work out. Okay. We better go.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for listening, everybody. I hope today has been helpful, and we will definitely see you again at 1 o'clock in the UK next Thursday. I too have trouble with time zones because I'm not in the UK either. Although I do visit as often as possible. Anyway, have a great week, and hopefully we'll speak to you all soon.
Bye.
See you later.